Hello YouTube, this is Joseph, and today I'm presenting you Aurelia, the Warleader. This is my friend's commander deck. His one and only deck that he's put all of his time, money, and energy into. Aurelia, the Warleader, when she attacks, she gives you an additional combat step. So this is a very explosive commander, very aggressive. His main strategy is to cast mid-range sort of creatures, like Baneslayer, Angel, or the new Gisela, and then cast Aralia and using the haste ability on her to attack and usually win through commander damage. And this is very much a Voltron strategy, so lots of equipment. So I hope you enjoy this video, and let's get on with the deck tech. So the first batch of cards that is very essential to a Boros deck is the Mana Ramp package, because Boros has an innate inability to ramp and catch up to your opponents. So this is a very important part of the deck, and I would say that you must have at least 12 ramp spells to make a Boros deck really effective. So the cards you'll see below you are Soul Ring, Land Tax, Mind Stone, Boros Signet, Sword of the Animist, Inspiring Statuary, Darksteel Ignite, Commander Sphere, Burnished Heart, Sword of Feast and Famine, Solemn Simulacrum, and Gilded Lotus. A big card for this deck is Land Tax, because it allows you to draw 3 basic lands and put them into your hand if your opponent has more lands than you. The cards Mind Stone, Command Sphere, and Solemn Simulacrum are just useful creatures or artifacts that can be sacrificed to draw cards. Card draw is another big part of Boros decks that is very important, and you need to put a lot of extra work and care into. Inspiring Statuary is very good for this deck because he's running lots of equipment, and Voltron is a big strategy for him. And this allows his equipment to tap for colorless mana and help him cast his bigger creatures, and it's very versatile. And then some of these are just self-explanatory. We got Soul Ring, Boros Signet, Color Fix, Darksteel Ignite. It's good to have an indestructible artifact, and Gilded Lotus. Sword of Feast and Famine is especially powerful in this deck because Aurelia has additional combat steps, so he'll get 2 instances of any of his swords every turn if he's attacking. So that lets him untap all of his lands twice and forces his opponent to discard 2 cards. And if he does that turn after turn, that ends up accumulating a lot of good value for his deck. And the second most vital part of a Boros deck is card draw. So in this batch of cards you'll see our different card draw spells. Enlighten Tutor and Open the Armory are there to just search out his Sword of Feast and Famine or Sword and Fire and Ice so that he can ramp himself or draw cards. Sometimes he looks for the Jitte so that he can do other combat tricks. Staff of Nin, every upkeep he draws additional card. And sometimes pinging a creature or an opponent for 1 damage is relevant. Can get rid of some creatures like Blood Artist. And card draw is a very challenging thing for Boros decks, so Reforge the Soul is a nice reset for your hand. It helps every player, but in most of the time he's only got 1 or 2 cards left in his hand. His opponents might have 5 or 6, and you can cast it and draw up to 7. So he's drawing 5 cards and all of his opponents are only drawing 1 or 2. And sometimes that actually ruins their hand and gives them less desirable cards. So Reforge the Soul is very powerful for this deck. Remember the Fallen can return an artifact and a creature from your graveyard to your hand, so this is a good way to recur some of his creatures and equipment. And it basically is a divination for the deck. You pay 3 mana, draw 2 cards. Skull Clamp, a good way to draw cards, and those are the key card draw spells. Next up is the equipment. These equipment are very powerful. He runs all 5 swords, the Jitte, Lightning Greaves, Champion's Helm, and Godsend. Godsend and Lightning Greaves is just to give his commander Hexproof or Shroud. Godsend is very powerful because if he blocks or is blocked by one of my creatures or one of my other opponent's creatures, then he can exile that creature, which is very worthwhile. And then all the swords have their own unique abilities that generate some sort of card advantage or gain some life or something. And the Jitte is really powerful because with additional combat steps of Aurelia, you get to put 4 charge counters on it if you've attacked twice that turn with whichever creature is equipped with it. So Putting 4 counters on it and then being able to give a creature -4, -4, or gain 8 life, or just boost your creature up by +8, +8 is so powerful. Especially because Aurelia is a 3/4, and if you can bump her up +8 in a single turn and hit twice, that's going to be 11 commander damage, 2 attack steps, that's 22 commander damage, and that's a lethal damage, which can take a player out completely. So that's one of the really good combos for the deck. All of the swords with the additional combat step of Aurelia is really powerful, so just keep that in mind. Like, that's kind of his main win condition, is casting some mid-range creatures and then putting on the equipment and then casting Aurelia the turn that he feels confident that he can tack in and just win. So that's kind of the main premise of his deck. It's very Voltron oriented. So we have 12 removal / board wipe effects. Relic of Progenitus is there just to get rid of any graveyard strategies, because that's a big weakness to the deck. It didn't have any answers before, and over years of tweaking this deck, that's been a very essential card for him, just to be able to interact with my Carador deck, or a lot of my decks run a lot of graveyard recursion in some way, so that's been an all-star. And at worst, he can just sack it to, yeah, draw a card. Like, that simple little text draw card is very handy. Then Blood Moon is there because a lot of the people in my playgroup are 3 or 4 colors. I sometimes even run 5 color decks. So Blood Moon is there mostly to just hinder any opponent from being able to play any spell they wish. He sometimes locks a player out of a certain color and can really slow down his opponents. Boros decks can really struggle in the late game, and this is a way to kind of catch himself back up. And it color fixes for him. Sometimes he has a whole bunch of plains and he doesn't have the mountains he needs out, and to make his non-basic lands into mountains can be sometimes a way of color fixing, at least for a 2-color deck. So Path to Exile and Source of Plowshare are his single-spotted removal. A big weakness to his deck for the long time was not having enough answers for enchantments. So he's running Wear and Tear, Revoke Existence, Forsake the Worldly, and Return to Dust, because they can hit artifacts and or enchantments. Forsake the Worldlies from Amonkhet, it's a new card, and it has the ability to cycle it. So very similar to Relic of Progenitus, you can always just cycle it away for an additional card if you really need that extra card. Then Fiery Confluence deals 6 damage to each opponent, 3 damage to each creature, or like destroy 3 artifacts, or any variants that you wish for that. He often uses the ability to do 2 damage to each creature, because Aurelia is 4 toughness, and most of his creatures are bigger than your opponent's. So just being able to wipe the field of all the little utility creatures has been quite impactful for his deck. Specifically against my Brea deck, I run a lot of little 1/1 flying Thopters that he struggles to get through, because he has these big flyers, but his flyers don't have trample. So if I can defend with a colorless Thopter, it doesn't matter if he has protection from all 5 colors, right? So that's a good way to just wipe the field of all little creatures. Cataclysm, Purification, and Austere Command are there more to equalize the board. Most of his creatures are over 4 CMC, so he can wipe all the creatures of 3 CMC or less, or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. And Cataclysm and the Purification are very handy in their kind of mid-game, because if he's like, if he faced a board wipe and he lost most of his investment, because a lot of the swords and creatures are kind of a mid-range casting cost, and if he's invested a lot of resources and they all get destroyed or something, this is a card that kind of equalizes the board for him, forcing each opponent to sacrifice down to the same amount of permanence, essentially. So if you ever see him just not play any spells in the first few turns, you have to wonder if he's mana screwed, or whether he just has this in his hand and he just is gonna wait for you to put a few permanents out so he can equalize the board to kind of give him some virtual card advantage. The Purification, I don't know how many games he's played it where he sacrifices like 1 or 2 permanents, and then we all sacrifice like 10. And because he plays it on his turn, he knows it's coming, and he can react and plan for it. So typically he'll sacrifice everything down to 3 lands, then he'll tap a land for like a Soul Ring, and then play a Signet or something, and he'll start rebuilding faster than his opponents can. So anyways, those are the removal package, the removal spells. If you have any suggestions, leave comments in the comment section below. So my friend Daniel runs a total of 25 creatures in the deck, and about 10 equipment. So these are the first batch of creatures, and a lot of them are there to just guarantee getting through on damage. He likes to have protection from particular colors and useful keywords, and he likes to have other forms of card draw and things. So Mother of Runes is very handy. He usually keeps it as a defensive creature, so if, let's say he has Aurelia or a different creature out with Sword of Fire and Ice on it, has protection from blue and red. That's great and all, but what if your opponent plays like a Putrefy, green and black? Well, then he holds up Mother of Runes so that he can kind of give a creature at instant speed a protection from whatever the removal color is. And it makes it really hard for you to remove his creatures if he keeps doing that. And 8.5 Tails does something very similar to that. It protects his creatures. Aethersworn Canoness makes it so your opponents can only cast one non-artifact spell a turn, which can slow some people down because half of his deck is artifacts, so it doesn't really slow him down at all, and he usually casts only 1 or 2 things per turn, and this is a way to kind of slow down your opponent to get some of that virtual card advantage. Pure Steel Paladin makes the equip cost 0. This is very handy and also allows him to draw cards. Mirian Crusader having protection from black and green, and typically with Sword of Fire and Ice added to it, now he has protection from 4 colors. Restoration Angel is more there for just utility. There are a few creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, but he is big into the angels. He loves angels, so it's just kind of another good tribal angel card to have in the deck. Daniel usually has Voice of All come in with protection from whatever color is the most relevant on the battlefield. Seraph of the Sword is a great blocker. All damage that would be dealt to her is prevented, so very good. Angelic Field Marshal makes all your creatures have vigilance. A weakness to Boros decks, or at least this particular deck, is if all your creatures are focused on attacking with the swords, he doesn't really have the greatest defense. So one combo he actually does with Aurelia is he uses the first attack step to do damage to his opponents, which allows him to untap all of his creatures. And then typically he doesn't utilize a second attack step, so that he gives his whole army kind of like a pseudo-vigilance, so he can also defend the opposing players. So the Angelic Field Marshal kind of is another form of giving everything vigilance and boosting the team. Angel of Jubilation, just to prevent your opponents from sacrificing creatures. I'm notorious for doing sacrifice outlet things to kind of hinder his ideas, and that's one way I usually get around these indestructible or hexproof creatures, is forcing my opponents to sacrifice. So one very big weakness to this deck is not having answers when your opponent forces you to sacrifice things. Leyline of, I believe, Leyline of Sanctity would be a great one to add to this deck if you have it. He does not have it currently, but that would be a good recommendation. Gisela the Broken Blade is a new one. Flying First Strike Lifelink. It's basically a miniature Baneslayer. And then God of Victory allows him to get through for that combat damage, because he gives all of his creatures menace and prevents damage dealt to his creatures. So these are just the first batch of creatures to his army of angels. This is the second batch of creatures for his deck. Stonehewer Giant is one of the most powerful ones in his deck because he can use his ability at instant speed and twice if he has 2 combat steps, because what Aurelia does, if you can read it here, is untap all your creatures. I mentioned this before, but being able to untap his creatures allows him to use Stonehewer Giant twice. So typically he attacks, and because of his vigilance, it doesn't cause Stonehewer Giant to tap, and then at instant speed he can tap him to search out an equipment, put it right onto Stonehewer Giant. Then he untaps Stonehewer Giant with the additional combat step and does it again. So this card can find him 2 swords with 2 like combat steps. It just does so much work for him. And then if he has gotten Fire and Ice and like the Jitte out or something, now he's able to draw a couple cards and do just so much stuff that it really hinders his opponents. Baneslayer Angel is such a powerful card, the lifelink is very relevant. Angelic Skirmisher is more there for utility. He can give his creatures any of the abilities at the beginning of each combat, whether it's his turn or his opponent's. So if he needs some life, he gives all his creatures lifelink. If he needs his creatures to be able to defend, he gives them all vigilance. Inferno Titan, this can just enter the battlefield, kill some utility creatures, and if you have Gisela out, then it can double damage and do a lot of work for you. Bruna the Fading Light, this is his newer card that he added as well because he's got the other Gisela, and in an ideal Christmas Land world, he'll eventually be able to meld them together to make an awesome angelic horror, but for now it's just there to bring back his angels or humans from the graveyard. And as you've seen, basically all of his creatures are either angels or humans, so it's very synergistic with his deck. Elshnorn just buffs his team and weakens his opponent's team. Balefire Dragon is kind of a board wipe on a stick. Gisela doubles damage and halves the damage he takes. And then Angel of Wrath and Angel of Hope are just his top end creatures. Angel of Hope gives everything indestructible. So this is his top of his curve for his creatures. So lastly, I wanted to highlight his 2 partner commanders that he recently added, Boorish Herder and Lineslinger. They both just work very synergistically with his plan. Having them both out at the beginning of the game gives him an additional card in his hand, so instead of starting with 7 in your hand and 1 commander for 8 cards, he gets 7 in his hand and 2 commanders, essentially. Bruce Tarl does kind of a miniature version of what Aurelia does. It doesn't give the additional combat step, but giving double strike to a creature, especially if it's equipped with a sword, has the same effect. And if he can give like double strike to a creature and get Aurelia out later in the game, now he's getting like multiple hits per turn, and it does so much work for him. And then Akiri Lineslinger is kind of like a cranial plating on a stick for him. First strike and vigilance, so he can attack and defend quite effectively with her. And this is just a really good partner pairing that's made his deck more versatile. Before, when he was only running Aurelia as the commander, if you could kill Aurelia a few times before he could really get off the ground, then his deck was stunted, and now he has a more aggressive, earlier game plan with the 2 partner commanders, and he can switch it up as he pleases. So some of the strengths of the deck would be the additional combat steps, getting maximum usage out of the swords, having protection from a lot of colors, so it's really hard to remove his creatures. The weakness to his deck is board wipes. If you can destroy all artifacts, that's a huge blow to his deck. And he doesn't have that much graveyard recursion. He wants to put Sun Titan in here, and he probably will. He needs to figure out what to take out. But if you can attack his hand and attack his artifacts and use board wipes, that really slows down this deck and really is a big weakness. Boros just struggles to get back in the game if it's taken a lot of early hits. And as a Boros player, I think one of his strengths is plays very strategically and only putting out a few permanents and making sure that he holds cards in his hand and never gets hellbent. And he plays very intellectually with his deck, and it's been very powerful and good to him. He's won lots of games. But yeah, this is a big part of the advantages to his deck. Like, he's really good playing politically and attacking, and it's very commander damage oriented. But if you can prevent him from getting in on that combat damage in some way, whether it's multiple like propagandas and ghostly prison sort of effects, or making it a wasteland for creatures to live, or destroying a lot of the artifacts that allow his creatures to get in for that combat damage, then his deck could definitely get stunted. And if you attack a Boros player, their hand or and make them discard cards that really affects them, because now they lose their answers. And this is why his board wipes are so important, because if he can play the Purification or Cataclysm and just equalize the board and get himself back into position, that's one of the best plays to get out of a tight situation. So there you have it, that's the deck. I'm not going over all the basic lands and some of the utility lands because they're very normal and self-explanatory. The ones I guess to highlight are there are a few lands that give haste. So to move these up, these two lands give haste to his creatures, and he runs Myriad Landscape for ramping and Strip Mine just to get rid of the opponent's utility lands. But there you have it, that's the deck. What do you think? Leave comments in the comment section below. I would love to hear back from you. My friend Daniel would really appreciate feedback. He's always looking to improve and make the deck better. If you have any suggestions, yeah, just leave them in the comment section below. Thanks, have a great week.